This episode of Patriot Stories from the Ozark Mountain chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution introduces Archibald McMillan. Let me introduce Charles McMillan, current president of the Ozark Mountain chapter. Welcome, Charles.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
How long have you been a member?
I joined the Sons of the American Revolution in June of 2011. So it's been a while. I started out in the budget committee and went from there.
So your patriot is Archibald McMillan.
My patriot is Archibald McMillan, and I think I could tell you why I found Archibald as a patriot.
Okay.
I was sitting at home, and I wish I'd have found this earlier in life. I really do, but I guess the timing was not mine. To learn about ancestry, to learn about my grandfathers. I thought, well, let's see, I know my dad's father was Herbert. Oh, who was his dad? I don't know. I didn't know past him. So that's what got me interested. I got into Ancestry.com and I posted, I've got some material that's been handed down that said Archibald was in the American Revolution. He was born, we think, in Scotland, and he emigrated to Belfast, Ireland, because of religious persecution. And then from there, they came to the colonies because of religious persecution. He probably landed in Maine, in that area, and then migrated to New Boston, New Hampshire. He was a farmer at the time, growing crops, and he was, the family history handed down says that he was in his field. 17th of April, 1775, the alarm went out. The Lexington alarm, Lexington Concord. He headed that way. He didn't actually make it because it was over before he got there. And so he heard Boston was under siege by the Redcoats. And so he joined the New Hampshire militia wearing his clothes that he wore out in the field. That's all he had. And he probably had a squirrel rifle or something like that. He didn't have modern day equipment to fight with. He's credited with marching on the Lexington alarm with men from neighboring Peterborough. He enlisted in Captain William Scott's company, served with the siege army outside of Boston, which was Breed's Hill, but they call it the Battle of Bunker Hill.
Well, what drove the Battle of Breed's Hill, or Bunker Hill, was the fact that Breed's Hill overlooked Boston and Boston Harbor. And so it was a good vantage point. Now, I believe before the British got there, the Americans had already taken that position.
It was interesting that they knew, because of the siege, that they got there like in the nighttime. Mm-hmm. And they built what was called a redoubt. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's where they dig out and they put in timbers to kind of protect, and it's like a small fortress. Well, the British looked up on the hill because they were that close, and they saw this redoubt overnight. And so they were concerned and decided, well, we're going to teach them a lesson. They can't stop us. We're going to send our best officers, and they're dressed in their red uniforms, to march up the hill and just take the hill and it'll be over with. Didn't happen that way.
Well, in the end, the British lost 226 men.
They lost officers. They ended up, actually, if you want to call it a winter loss, it's similar to many of the battles that was fought by the Americans, in that they maybe lost the ground, but they didn't lose as many men.
Right, and they certainly taught the British a lesson.
Taught the British a lesson that, hey, you've got somebody to deal with here.
Yeah.
We may not be your conscripted men, but we're going to fight for the right. And that's what they did. And they actually ran out of ammunition.
Really?
Yeah. They ran out of ammunition and they had to retreat. And so the British took over Breeds Hill, but at a tremendous cost of men.
Yeah, well, the British lost, I think it was almost 10% of their force.
Which is considerable considering what they were up against. I'm not sure exactly the time frame on the 17th, of course, that he was wounded. That wasn't written down in history, but he was wounded, and he was identified in correspondence written by Captain William Scott, Colonel John Stark, and Surgeon John Homans. And those writings were to establish the fact that he was wounded in battle. He received a musket ball in his right hand, which made him disabled. He wasn't able to do his trade, which besides farming, he grew vegetables and had crops like everybody. His trade was to make material for his brother Daniel McMillan. His brother was called Daniel the Tailor. Yeah. And eventually, George Washington, who they made the supreme commander, if you will, came in later.
I understand that was within 2 weeks.
Yeah.
He had, at Cambridge, he took control of the fighting force.
Uh-huh.
Archibald continued in the efforts despite his hand, or was that it for him in the war?
I think that was it as far as he was a private. That's what his rank was in the New Hampshire, 1st Regiment, New Hampshire. And I have a drum and that I actually got an emblem on it for the 2nd Regiment because I couldn't find one for the 1st Regiment, but it was New Hampshire militia anyway. And I played that drum today, and the uniform that I wear in the Ozark Mountain Chapter's Sons of the American Revolution Color Guard represents the New Hampshire militia.
Very nice.
The Rangers, if you will. He was a Minuteman.
So after the war was over, he became is it a cloth maker for his brother?
He did. He was a cloth maker. Yes, and Daniel was the tailor. And I think Daniel probably served. I don't have as much information on him. Mm-hmm. I had in my research, trying to find information on who Archibald was. I had a piece of paper handed down through my mother and generations before her that talked about Archibald coming to the colonies and being wounded and being a farmer and a cloth maker. And in my research, I found that he had built a house in New Boston, New Hampshire, and it was still standing. And this was around 1756, 55 in that time frame.
Hence your artifact.
Hence my artifact. I called and found out that Anne and Emo, that's IMMO Christoph, owned the house. And then it's still standing. They moved it from its location about 600 feet because of traffic, etc. And they were gracious enough to have my wife come out one summer, and we visited with them. It's actually been a few years ago, in August about 2011, so it's been a while. But they had restored the house, added on to it, and allowed us to go through every part of the house. And where they were generous, I saw this when I walked downstairs and looked in where the fireplace was, and a couple of these were just laying there. And I said, "Do you mind if I take one of those?" She said, "Of course not." And so I asked for the second one to give to Patricia Thompson, who lives in Montana. Now, who's Patricia Thompson? Turns out to be a 5th or 6th cousin. And her Daniel was Archibald's brother. And she was doing and that's how I found out about Archibald, actually, is through her, because she had been doing research for years. She's written articles, she's published in Salt Lake City, and so I found a wealth of information.
Now, do you know where Archibald is buried?
We do not. I don't know all the details. He was in New York City, or New York, on a business trip. And I think he was in an accident and he got killed. And there wasn't a record. I would hope that his body would have come back to New Hampshire and probably buried on a family plot someplace, but we're not sure.
Yeah.
It would be neat to find out someday.
So there's Archibald McMillan, born 1720s, ended up moving to Ireland, then emigrated to the colonies, and then fought at the Battle of Bunker Hill, Breed's Hill, lost the use of his right hand, went from farmer to clothmaker for his brother the tailor, and passed away in 1796.
That's correct.
Private in the New Hampshire militia.
That's correct. 1st Regiment, New Hampshire. And as a member of the SAR, you can be dual members from different societies. And I joined the New Hampshire Society.
But there we go. Archibald McMillan, American Patriot.